The transport ship broke apart like a tin can hit by a hammer. David Reed felt his body slam against the restraints as the hull screamed and twisted around him. Metal shrieked. Sparks flew everywhere. His head cracked against something hard and the world went fuzzy for a moment. When his vision cleared, he saw the windscreen filled with green. Trees, mountains, ground rushing up way too fast. The impact threw him forward so hard he thought his ribs would crack. Everything went dark. David woke up to silence. That was the first thing that struck him as wrong. Ships always made noise. Engines humming, air recyclers whirring, people talking. This silence felt thick and heavy like a blanket pressed over his face. He tried to move and pain shot through his left arm. Broken. Definitely broken. He looked down and saw his forearm bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. "Hey," he called out. His voice came out scratchy and weak. "Anyone alive?" Nothing, no answer. No movement. Just that awful silence. David unbuckled himself with his good hand and stumbled toward the back of the cockpit. The crew compartment was worse than he expected. The crash had torn through the hull like paper. Phil the pilot was still in his seat, but David only needed one look to know he was gone. Same with Torres and Lee in the back. All dead, all his friends. The survey mission to check out unexplored planets had seemed so routine just yesterday. He was alone. David grabbed the emergency kit from the wall locker and stumbled out through a gap in the hull. The fresh air hit him like a slap. It smelled green and alive and nothing like recycled ship air. He fell to his knees in the dirt and threw up. Then he sat there for a long time, just breathing and trying not to think about the bodies behind him. The planet was beautiful in a wild sort of way. Massive trees with purple bark stretched up toward a blue-green sky. 2 small moons hung visible even in daylight. Rocky cliffs rose in the distance like the broken teeth of some enormous creature. The survey computers had called this place Vertus 7 before everything went to hell. An uncharted world in an unexplored system, perfect for a quick look around. Except now the ship was scrap and the communications array was destroyed and nobody knew where he was. David used the medical kit to splint his arm as best he could. It hurt like fire, but he gritted his teeth and worked through it. He'd been an engineer for 12 years. He knew how things fit together. Even broken bones. He swallowed some painkillers and took stock of what he had. Not much, some food packs, water purification tablets, a basic medical kit, a portable scanner, a plasma cutter for salvage work. No weapons worth mentioning, no way to call for help. He spent the rest of that first day pulling useful stuff from the wreckage. Every movement made his arm throb, but he kept going because staying busy meant not thinking about being the only human on an alien planet with no rescue coming. That night he made a small camp away from the crash site. He didn't want to sleep near the bodies. The guilt already sat in his chest like a stone. The planet's wildlife made strange sounds in the darkness. Hooting calls, rustling in the undergrowth. Something big moving through the trees far off. David sat with his back against a rock and the plasma cutter in his lap, and didn't sleep much at all. Morning came with double shadows from the 2 moons setting. David ate a protein bar that tasted like cardboard and checked his arm. Still broken, but the swelling had gone down a bit. He needed to explore. Find water. Figure out if anything on this planet wanted to eat him. He packed light and headed toward the cliffs in the distance because higher ground meant better visibility. He'd been walking maybe 2 hours when he heard it. A sound like nothing he'd ever heard before. Part roar, part scream. All pain. It came from somewhere ahead where the ground dropped away into a ravine. David knew he should turn around. Unknown planet. Unknown creatures. But that sound pulled at something in him. He'd heard people scream like that when they were dying and afraid. He crept to the edge of the ravine and looked down. What he saw made him forget how to breathe. The creature was massive. Easily 20 feet long from snout to tail. It had scales that shimmered like oil on water, shifting between deep green and bronze in the sunlight. 4 powerful legs ending in claws that could tear through steel. A long neck and a head that was all angles and sharp edges. But the most striking thing was the wings. Huge leathery wings that looked strong enough to carry the creature through the sky. Except one wing was pinned under a pile of rocks. The membrane was torn and bleeding. The bones looked bent wrong. The creature's eyes found David. They were gold and bright with intelligence and pain. It roared again, but this time the sound was different. Weaker, pleading almost. David stood there on the edge of that cliff and knew he should walk away. This thing was clearly a predator, dangerous even injured, but those eyes. They looked at him with something he recognized. Desperation. The same feeling he'd had waking up alone in the crashed ship. The feeling of knowing you were dying and there was nothing you could do about it. He'd lost his whole crew yesterday. Everyone he knew on this planet was dead. But this creature was still alive. Still fighting, okay? David said quietly. Let me think about this. The dragon watched him and waited. Getting down into the ravine nearly killed David twice. Once when a handhold crumbled and he slid 10 feet before catching himself on a root. Once when loose rocks shifted under his boots and he almost tumbled over the edge. His broken arm screamed at him the whole way. By the time he reached the bottom, sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cool air. The creature watched him approach. It didn't move. Couldn't move with half a ton of rock pinning its wing. Up close, it was even bigger than David thought. Its head alone was the size of his torso. Those golden eyes tracked his every step. He could hear it breathing in short, pained gasps. Easy, David said softly. I'm going to help you, I think. If you don't eat me first. He had no idea if the creature understood language, but talking made him feel less insane about this whole situation. He set down his pack and pulled out the scanner. The device hummed as it analyzed the creature's biology. Carbon-based. Warm-blooded. Complex nervous system. The readings were close enough to Earth animals that his medical supplies might actually work. Might. The rocks were the first problem. David couldn't lift them. Not with one arm. Not even with 2 arms. He needed leverage. He spent an hour hiking back to the crash site and salvaging a hydraulic jack from the ship's cargo bay. Getting it back down into the ravine took another hour. The whole time he wondered what the hell he was doing. This creature could kill him the second it was free, but when he got back it was still there, still watching him with those intelligent eyes. It had tried to pull its wing free at some point. Fresh blood darkened the rocks. The creature's breathing had gotten worse. Stop moving, David told it. You're making it worse. He set up the jack and started lifting rocks one at a time. Slowly, carefully. Each one weighed more than he did. The jack groaned and hissed, but it held. The creature made a low rumbling sound deep in its chest. Not threatening, more like it was trying to communicate something. When the last rock came free, the wing flopped onto the ground. The creature tried to pull it close, but cried out in pain. David could see why. 3 bones were clearly broken. The wing membrane had tears running through it like ripped fabric. Blood oozed from a dozen places. Without treatment, this thing would die from infection even if the bones somehow healed wrong. David sat back and rubbed his face with his good hand. He was an engineer, not a doctor. He fixed machines, not living things. But bones were like support struts. Membranes were like hull plating. Infection was like rust. Maybe the principles were similar enough. I'm going to touch your wing now, he said. Please don't eat me. He reached out slowly. The creature's whole body tensed, but it didn't pull away. David's fingers touched the scales near the injury and the creature rumbled again. Up close, the scales felt warm and smooth like polished stone. He ran the scanner over the damaged wing and studied the readings. The bone structure was similar to bird wings. Hollow and light but strong. The breaks were clean at least. That was something. David went back to his pack and pulled out everything that might help. Antiseptic spray, synthetic skin patches, carbon fiber rods from the ship's interior paneling, medical tape, antibiotics from the emergency kit. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He started with the antibiotics. Getting a creature this size to take pills seemed impossible, so he crushed them and mixed them with water from his canteen. Then he held the mixture near the creature's snout. Those golden eyes looked at him, then at the cup, then back at him. The creature sniffed once and drank. Just like that. Like it understood he was trying to help. Good, David said. His hands were shaking. Okay, now the hard part. Setting the bones took 3 hours. David had to feel his way through it. Each bone fragment had to line up just right. He used the carbon fiber rods as splints, taping them carefully along the length of each broken section. The creature made sounds the whole time, deep, painful sounds that made David's chest hurt. But it never snapped at him. Never tried to pull away. It just lay there and endured. The wing membrane was trickier. David used the synthetic skin patches to cover the worst tears. They were designed for human injuries, but the material bonded to the creature's skin well enough. He worked slowly and carefully, aware that one mistake could cripple this wing forever. The sun moved across the sky. His stomach growled. His broken arm throbbed. He ignored all of it and kept working. When he finally finished, the wing looked like something from a nightmare, covered in tape and patches and splints, but it was stable. The bleeding had stopped. The creature could fold it carefully against its side. David collapsed against the ravine wall. He was exhausted, hungry, in pain. He'd just spent an entire day saving an alien predator that could kill him without trying. This was definitely the craziest thing he'd ever done. The creature shifted its massive body and looked at him. Then it did something David didn't expect. It lowered its head and made a soft chirping sound. Almost gentle, almost grateful. "You're welcome," David said. Then he laughed because he was talking to a dragon on an alien planet and his whole crew was dead and he was probably going to die here too, but at least he'd done one good thing. The creature closed its eyes and slept. David watched it breathe for a while. Then he pulled out a protein bar and ate it slowly. Tomorrow he'd figure out what came next. Tonight he'd just sit here with this strange creature and rest. The double moons rose overhead and filled the ravine with silver light. 3 weeks changed everything. David set up a proper camp near the ravine where the creature was recovering. He couldn't call it a dragon even though that's what it looked like. That felt too much like a fairy tale and this was real. The creature was real, so he started calling it Ash because of the dark streaks on its scales that looked like soot marks. Ash couldn't fly yet. The wing was healing, but it needed time. So Ash stayed in the ravine and David brought food. At first he tried fish from a nearby stream. Ash ate them but didn't seem satisfied. Then one day David watched Ash drag itself to the ravine edge and catch something that looked like a 6-legged deer. The creature tore into it with teeth that could bite through bone. After that, David understood. Ash was a hunter, a predator built for killing. But Ash never hunted David. Even when David came close to check the wing. Even when David had to change the bandages and it clearly hurt. Ash would rumble and hiss but never snap. Never threaten. It was like the creature understood that David was trying to help. They started communicating in small ways. Ash would make certain sounds and David learned what they meant. A low rumble meant contentment. A sharp chirp meant pain or warning. A soft trill meant curiosity. David would gesture and point and slowly Ash began to understand some of that too. It wasn't language exactly. More like two very different beings finding ways to share ideas. One morning David was working on salvaging more parts from the crashed ship when he heard a sound behind him. He turned and nearly fell over. Ash had climbed out of the ravine. The creature moved slowly, favoring the injured wing, but it had made the climb. All that mass and power pulling itself up the rocks. "What are you doing up here?" David asked. Ash chirped and moved closer. Then the creature did something strange. It lowered its head and nudged David's pack with its snout. Pushed it toward David. Inside the pack was the plasma cutter David had left at camp. Ash had brought it to him. You brought me my tool?" David stared. "How did you know I needed it?" Ash made that soft trill sound. The curious one. Then it settled down nearby and watched David work. Just watched with those intelligent golden eyes. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. This wasn't just an animal. Ash understood things. Learned things, maybe even thought about things the way people did. The next week, Ash started showing David things. Places on the planet, a grove of trees with fruit that turned out to be edible, a cave system that stayed warm even at night, a high ridge where David could see for miles in every direction. Ash couldn't fly properly yet, but it could glide short distances. The creature would scramble up a cliff, spread its wings, and glide down to show David the way. One day they reached the mountains. Real mountains that punched up into the clouds. Ash climbed steadily up a narrow path that looked like it had been used many times before. David followed, his heart pounding from the thin air. When they reached a plateau, David stopped and stared. There was a city carved into the mountainside. Not ruins, an actual city. Buildings cut from the stone with careful precision. Bridges spanning between peaks. Towers that caught the sunlight and threw it back in rainbow colors. And everywhere, there were more creatures like Ash. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Flying between the towers, resting on the bridges. Moving through the streets. "Oh my God," David whispered. "You're not alone. There are more of you." Ash chirped and moved forward. Other creatures noticed them immediately. Several took flight and circled overhead. Their calls echoed off the mountain walls. Warning calls. Aggressive calls. David's hand went to the plasma cutter at his belt. even though he knew it wouldn't help against creatures this big. An enormous creature landed in front of them, bigger than Ash by half, scales that shimmered deep red like cooling metal. This one had scars across its snout and neck. Battle scars. It roared at David, and the sound nearly knocked him over. Ash stepped between David and the big creature. Ash roared back. Not as loud, but just as fierce. The two creatures faced each other while David stood frozen. Then Ash did something that made David's throat tight. Ash spread his injured wing, showed the splints and patches and all the careful work David had done to fix it. Ash gestured at David with his head, made a series of sounds that were clearly trying to explain something. The big creature looked at the wing, then at David, then back at Ash. The aggressive posture softened slightly. The creature made a questioning sound. Ash chirped and nudged David forward gently with his snout. David took a shaky breath and stepped around Ash. He held up his hands to show he was unarmed. Well, mostly unarmed. The plasma cutter probably didn't count as a real weapon to creatures this size. "Hello," David said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "My name is David. I'm a friend." More creatures landed around them. David counted at least 20, all of them watching him with those bright, intelligent eyes. He saw young ones clinging to their parents, elders with scarred scales and wise faces, warriors with the same battle marks as the big red one. This wasn't just a group of animals. This was a society, a civilization. The big red creature stepped forward and leaned down until its face was level with David's. This close, David could feel the heat coming off its scales, could smell something like cinnamon and smoke. The creature's eyes were amber instead of gold. They studied David with an intensity that made him feel like he was being read like a book. Then the creature did something David never expected. It lowered its massive head in what could only be a bow. David lived in the mountain city for 2 months. The creatures called themselves the Drakari in their language of rumbles and trills. The big red one was named Ember, and she was Ash's mother and the leader of this clan. She'd given David a place to stay in one of the carved stone buildings, a room big enough for a human but small by Drakari standards. They brought him food, showed him their ways, taught him more of their language. The Drakari were not primitive. They had art carved into every surface, music made with instruments built for creatures with claws and long necks, history recorded in pictures that covered entire walls. David learned that the Drakari had once filled this planet. Hundreds of clans spread across continents. Then something called the Hunters had come from the sky in ships that burned and killed. A war that lasted 3 years and nearly ended the Drakari forever. The Drakari had won, but barely. They'd driven the Hunters away through sheer ferocity, and by using their knowledge of the planet's terrain. But the cost had been terrible. 9 out of every 10 Drakari died. Whole clans wiped out. Cities destroyed. Only a few thousand remained now. Hidden in the mountains. Afraid the Hunters might return, David tried to explain that there were good species out in the galaxy. Humans who would trade and talk instead of kill. But he had no way to call them. No way to prove his words. So he just lived among the Drakari and tried to be useful. He fixed things that were broken, showed them some human engineering tricks, learned their ways in return. Ash's wing healed slowly but well. After 6 weeks, Ash could fly short distances. After 8 weeks, Ash could hunt from the air again. The bond between them had grown into something David couldn't quite put into words. More than friendship. More than pet and owner, because Ash was nobody's pet. Maybe family was the closest word. Brothers who happened to be from different species. Then everything changed on a day that started normal. David was helping some young Drakari carve a new bridge support when Ember roared from the highest tower. Not just her. All the adults started roaring together. An alarm call. David dropped his tools and ran to the tower. Ash met him halfway and they climbed together. From the top, David could see the whole valley spread out below. And above it, coming down through the clouds, were ships. Metal ships with smooth hulls and weapons that glowed red. Hunter ships. Just like in the Drakari histories. No, David breathed. No, they can't be back, but they were. 5 ships descended and took positions around the mountain. More ships hung in orbit above. David could see them as bright dots against the sky. The Hunters had found Virtus 7 again, found the Drakari again. Ember roared orders and the clan responded immediately. Young ones and elders moved into the deeper caves. Warriors took positions on the high points. Everyone moved with practiced efficiency. They drilled for this. prepared for the day the hunters might return. David's mind raced. The Drakari were brave, but they couldn't fight ships, couldn't fight energy weapons and bombs. They'd be slaughtered. Unless— Ember, David shouted. He grabbed his scanner and ran to where the clan leader stood. The crystals. The ones you use for light and heat. Can you bring me some? Ember looked at him with those amber eyes. Then she called to several warriors. Within minutes, they brought David armfuls of the glowing crystals that the Drakari mined from deep in the mountains. David scanned them frantically. Yes, this could work. The crystals generated electromagnetic fields naturally. If he could amplify them, focus them— I can make weapons, David said quickly. He gestured wildly, trying to make Ember understand. Not like your teeth and claws. Weapons against their machines. But I need time. I need help. And I need everyone to hold them off. Ember didn't hesitate. She roared agreement and assigned 10 Drakari to help David. Then she launched herself off the tower. Other warriors followed. They flew straight at the hunter ships. David ran to his workshop with Ash right behind him. The 10 Drakari helpers crowded in as much as they could. David started giving orders. Bring wire from the crashed ship. Bring more crystals. Bring metal plates. The Drakari moved fast, bringing everything he asked for without question. Outside, the sounds of battle began. Energy weapons firing, Drakari roaring, explosions echoing off the mountains. David forced himself to focus. He'd seen electromagnetic pulse weapons before. Human military used them to disable enemy equipment. The principles were simple. Generate a massive surge of electromagnetic energy. Release it all at once. Fry every circuit in range. He could build that. Maybe. If the crystals were strong enough. If he had enough time. David worked faster than he'd ever worked in his life. His hands moved on autopilot, connecting wires, mounting crystals, building crude but functional EMP emitters. Ash watched and learned and started helping, using his claws to hold pieces in place while David worked. The other Drakari did the same. They couldn't understand the technology, but they understood urgency. Hours passed. The sounds of battle grew worse. David heard screams. Drakari screams. His hands shook, but he kept working. More crystals, bigger capacitors, stronger casings. Each emitter had to be light enough for a Drakari to carry in flight, but powerful enough to disable a ship's systems. Finally, he had 5 completed. 5 crude boxes filled with crystals and wiring in desperate hope. David strapped one to Ash's back. The other 4 went to the biggest, strongest warriors Ember sent to him. Listen carefully, David told them through gestures and broken Drakari words. Fly close to the ships. When I trigger this, a pulse will come out. It will hurt your eyes. Hurt your head. But it will hurt the ships more. Their machines will stop. Then you can fight them your way, Ash chirped, understanding. The other warriors rumbled agreement. They didn't fully understand, but they trusted him. That trust felt heavier than anything David had ever carried. The warriors launched into the air. David watched them go and prayed to whatever gods might be listening. Then he ran for the highest point with the trigger device in his hand and hoped like hell this would work. The EMP devices worked, but not well enough. David watched from the tower as Ash and the other warriors flew at the hunter ships. They got close. Close enough. David triggered the pulse and the crystals flared so bright he had to look away. When he looked back, 2 of the 5 ships were falling, smoking and spinning out of control as they crashed into the valley floor. But 3 ships remained active. Their shields had protected them somehow. Worse, the pulse had hurt the Drakari. David saw Ash tumbling through the air, disoriented. The other warriors struggled to stay aloft. The electromagnetic burst had done something to their natural senses, made them dizzy or sick. They recovered, but it took precious seconds. Seconds the hunters used to regroup. The battle turned brutal. Drakari warriors threw themselves at the ships with claws and teeth and plasma breath. Some broke through the hull plating. Some tore open doors and dragged hunters out into the open air. But for every hunter killed, 2 more emerged. They had powered armor, energy weapons, technology the Drakari couldn't match. David watched Ember fight 3 armored hunters at once on a narrow bridge. She was magnificent and terrifying, but even she was bleeding from a dozen wounds. All across the city, Drakari were dying. The young ones and elders stayed hidden in the caves, but how long before the hunters found them? Then something worse happened. The ships in orbit began to glow. David had seen that glow before on human military vessels. They were charging orbital weapons, planet killers. The hunters weren't trying to conquer anymore. They were going to wipe out every living thing on Vertus 7. "No," David said. Then louder, "No!" Ash landed beside him, breathing hard. Blood ran from a cut on the creature's shoulder. Their eyes met, and David saw the same desperate knowledge there. They were losing. The Drakari would all die. David would die. Everything would end, unless... David grabbed Ash's head with both hands. His broken arm had healed enough to use again. "I have an idea. A terrible idea. But it's the only chance we have." He pulled out his scanner and showed Ash the orbital ships. Then he gestured up, way up, higher than any Drakari had ever flown. Ash understood immediately and roared in protest. The sound said impossible. "Too high, too cold. Too dangerous, I know," David said. His throat felt tight. "But if I can get to one of those ships, I can stop them. I can use their own systems against them. But I need to get up there." Ash looked at him for a long moment. Then the creature looked at Ember fighting below. At the burning buildings. At the warriors dying to protect their home. Ash looked back at David and made a sound that wasn't quite a chirp or a rumble. It was something sadder. Something that meant yes, even though it might kill them both. David gathered everything he needed. The oxygen tanks from his crashed ship. Every piece of insulating material he could find. Thermal blankets. Emergency supplies. He strapped it all together into a harness and climbed onto Ash's back. Other warriors saw what they were doing and roared questions. Ember herself flew up to the tower. David met her amber eyes and tried to explain through gestures and broken words. Up, high up. Stop the ships in the sky. Save everyone. Ember looked at her son, at the human clinging to Ash's back with his crude harness and desperate plan. Then she roared to 3 other elite warriors, the strongest and fastest in the clan. They would fly with Ash and David, would carry them as high as they could before the cold and thin air became too much. It was still probably a suicide mission, but now it was a suicide mission with backup. Dawn came and they launched. 5 Drakari rising from the burning city, carrying one fragile human who weighed barely anything but somehow felt heavier than stone. They climbed in a spiral. Higher and higher, the air grew thin. David's oxygen tanks hissed as they fed him air. The cold bit through his blankets and clothes like knives. The Drakari struggled. David could feel Ash's breathing change beneath him, hear the labored beats of the creature's wings. The other warriors fell back one by one. First one, then another, then the third. They couldn't go any higher. Their bodies weren't made for the edge of space. But Ash kept climbing, kept pushing higher even as frost formed on the creature's scales, even as breathing became gasping. Even as the injured wing that David had fixed months ago began to tear open again from the strain. Blood froze on the membrane. Ash roared in pain but didn't stop. Above them, hunter shuttles moved between the orbital ships and the planet's surface. Supply runs, troop movements. David had counted on this, had gambled everything on being able to catch one. They intercepted a shuttle at the very edge of the atmosphere where the sky turned from blue to black. The other 3 Drakari who'd managed to follow this far hit the shuttle with their remaining EMP devices. The shuttle's systems died. It began to tumble. David released the harness and kicked off from Ash's back. For 3 horrible seconds he floated through near vacuum, his oxygen tank depleting faster than expected, his body screaming at the cold. Then he slammed into the shuttle's hull and his magnetic boots locked on. He looked back to give Ash a thumbs up, to say they did it. They actually did it, but Ash wasn't there. David's heart stopped. He scanned the sky frantically and saw Ash falling, tumbling end over end, unconscious or dead from the cold and the altitude and the strain. The creature's wings were frozen and still. Ash dropped toward the planet like a stone. David had maybe 3 minutes before the hunters rebooted the shuttle systems. 3 minutes to save the world. But all he could think about was Ash falling, and there was nothing he could do. He forced himself to move, forced himself to open the shuttle's emergency hatch, forced himself to work even as tears froze on his face. Ash had carried him to the stars. Now David had to make it mean something. David ripped open the shuttle's control panel with hands that barely worked from the cold. His engineering knowledge kicked in despite the panic crushing his chest. Hunter tech was different from human tech, but the basics were the same. Power flows, control circuits, navigation systems. He could work with this, but he kept seeing Ash falling, kept imagining the impact when the creature hit the ground. All that grace and power and intelligence snuffed out in one terrible moment. David's vision blurred and he realized he was crying. No time for that. No time for anything except the mission. Except screw the mission. Ash was his friend. His brother. The creature who'd trusted him enough to fly to the edge of space on a crazy human's desperate plan. David made a choice that was probably stupid but felt right in his core. He rebooted the shuttle's basic systems. Just engines and life support. Left the weapons and communications dead. Then he grabbed the controls and punched the engines to full burn. Not up toward the command ship. Down. Racing after Ash's falling form. The shuttle screamed as it hit atmosphere. Warning alarms blared. Hull temperature spiked. David didn't care. He pushed the engines harder. The shuttle was a brick with rockets compared to Drakari grace, but it was fast. He caught up to Ash at 15,000 feet and matched velocity. Ash's body tumbled past the windscreen, scales white with frost, wings limp, not moving, not breathing from what David could see. He activated the shuttle's cargo tractor beam and prayed it still worked after the EMP. The beam flickered once, twice, then locked on and pulled Ash into the cargo bay. David set the autopilot to level out and ran to the back. The cargo bay was barely big enough for Ash's massive form. David cranked the heat to maximum and flooded the space with oxygen. He pulled out the emergency medical kit from the wall locker and started working. Ash wasn't breathing. David tilted the creature's head back and cleared the airway. Then he pressed both hands on Ash's chest right where the scanner showed the heart should be. Pushed down hard. Counted compressions. Come on, please, nothing. Ash's scales felt like ice under his hands. David kept going. 30 compressions. 2 breaths into the creature's nose. 30 more compressions. His arms burned. His broken arm screamed. He didn't stop. After the 3rd cycle, Ash's chest heaved. The creature coughed and gasped, and those golden eyes opened. Confused, hurting, but alive. Ash made a weak chirping sound. "You're okay," David said. His voice cracked. "You're going to be okay." He wrapped every thermal blanket around Ash, checked the wing injuries. The old damage had reopened, but it wasn't as bad as he'd feared. Ash would fly again. Eventually. David sat next to the creature and just breathed for a moment. They were both alive. Against all odds, they were both alive. Then reality crashed back. The orbital ships were still charging weapons. The Drakari below were still dying. David had used precious minutes saving Ash, but he couldn't regret it. Wouldn't regret it. He ran back to the cockpit and aimed the shuttle at the command ship. The hunters had probably noticed one of their shuttles acting strange by now. He had maybe 2 minutes before they blew him out of the sky. 2 minutes to finish what they'd started. David activated the EMP emitters still strapped to Ash's back remotely. The pulse fried the shuttle's systems again, but also created an electromagnetic bubble that scrambled targeting sensors. The command ship's weapons fired but missed. The shuttle crashed into the hangar bay going way too fast. Metal shrieked. Something in David's ribs cracked, but they were inside. He grabbed the plasma cutter and his scanner. Hunters in powered armor rushed toward the crashed shuttle. David hit the cargo bay release and Ash burst out like a storm made flesh. The creature was injured and cold and barely recovered, but still stronger than any 10 hunters. Ash's claws tore through armor like paper. Plasma breath melted weapons. The hunters fell back in panic. David ran for the ship's engineering section. His scanner showed him the way through corridors that felt too small and lit too harsh. Hunters tried to stop him, but Ash was right behind him, clearing the path with brutal efficiency. They moved like they'd been fighting together for years instead of months. The engineering core was massive. Generators that powered the whole ship. David pulled out the portable drive he'd prepared. Software he'd written on long nights in the mountain city. A virus designed to spread through networked systems and shut them down. Simple but effective. He plugged it into the main terminal. Alarms blared immediately. The hunters knew what he was doing. He could hear reinforcements coming. Heavy footsteps. Lots of them. Ash roared a warning and positioned himself at the only door, protecting David while he worked. Just like David had protected Ash while setting that broken wing months ago, the virus uploaded and began spreading. David watched it cascade through the ship's systems. Weapons offline, shields down, life support failing. Then it jumped to the other ships through their communication links. One by one, the orbital vessels went dark. No more threat. No more planet killers. David slumped against the terminal. They'd done it. Actually done it. He started laughing because it was insane, all of it. A crashed engineer and a wounded dragon saving an entire species with nothing but desperation and trust. Ash limped over and lowered his head next to David. Made that soft trill sound. The curious one. The one that meant everything was strange but maybe okay. Yeah, David said. We did good, buddy. Below, the Drakari saw the ships go dark. Saw the hunters' weapons fail. They pressed the attack with renewed fury and drove the invaders back. Ember herself tore open a grounded ship and roared victory. David piloted the crippled shuttle back to the surface with Ash resting in the cargo bay. When they landed, the entire clan was waiting. Not just Ash's clan. Others had come from across the mountains. Hundreds of Drakari all roaring together. A sound of grief for the fallen and joy for the survivors. Ember approached and bowed her massive head. Then every other Drakari did the same, bowing to the small human who'd saved them, to Ash who'd carried him to the stars. David felt overwhelmed and small and somehow larger than he'd ever been. Over the following months, David taught the Drakari how to use the captured hunter technology. They learned fast, brilliant minds behind those dragon faces. They built their own ships, reached for space. Connected with the broader galaxy, when the human fleet finally arrived to investigate the distress beacon, they found something unprecedented. A human and an alien species standing together as equals, as friends, as family. David never left Virtus 7, it was home now. Ash never fully recovered from that desperate flight. The creature's wing had a permanent crook in it, a limp in flight that would never heal. But Ash wore it like a badge of honor. They sat together on a cliff overlooking the rebuilt city, watching the first joint human Drakari ship rise toward orbit. David's arm was still crooked from the crash. Ash's wing was still bent from the climb. Two broken creatures who'd fixed each other when it mattered most. We did good, David said quietly. Ash rumbled agreement, and together they watched the stars.